it lightens it all up. I can now say, thanks so much, team. That was amazing input. Now I'm going to analyze that input and I'm going to come back and yes, I'm going to do this. No, I'm not going to do this for this reason. And I might do this, but we've got to have a social contract that says we're going to embrace radical transparency for the sake of having bolder ideas, not consensus.
Hello, today I'm chatting with and learning from Keith Ferrazzi. Keith is a fellow leadership team coach, and he's coached Fortune 500 companies, startups, and government. He is the former CMO at Deloitte. He was the youngest ever CMO at Deloitte. And we get into a little bit of the backstory and the team there. He also went on to Starwood Hotels, and although they created like the W Hotel and they exited to Marriott, a different experience and a different level of success from the leadership team at those two organizations. So we get to reflect on that a little bit. He went to Yale and he went to Harvard. He's the New York Times bestselling author of Never Eat Alone, Who's Got Your Back, and Never Lead Alone, which is his new book, which is behind me, which we're going to talk about today. Here he's trying to reinvent leadership, and he's trying to bring in this concept of teamship, where we break down the silos and we say we're going to get away from the org chart, and who's in your team. So the three things I discovered from this conversation with Keith are the shift from leadership to teamship. Absolutely vital. You can't be successful as a leader unless you have a team working with you. And leaders need to empower teams to self-manage. I see this all the time with CEOs managing in one-to-ones instead of managing the team or coaching the team. And the CEO owns, or the leader owns, the accountability, not the team. So absolutely vital. Embracing radical candor. We've had Kim Scott on the show before. This move away from conflict avoidance. This is the biggest thing that holds teams back. We've got to build trust through honest, open conversations. And lastly, some high return practices that we get Keith to talk about. So things like stress testing and candor check-ins. How do we make the teamwork proactive and not reactive? So fantastic conversation learning from Keith. I loved it. I'm sure you will too.
Hi, I'm Keith Ferrazzi. I coach executive teams and have done so for 24 years. I have the blessing of having had an extraordinary, impactful book called Never Eat Alone that defines the future of relationships in our life. And now I'm coming out with a book called Never Lead Alone, 24 years of research that we've been working on for high-performing teams. So this conversation, I guess, is going to be a journey from Never Eat Alone to Never Lead Alone. Dominic, how you doing?
I'm very good indeed, Keith. I'm absolutely delighted to get you on. 24 years of research. Look, you could have ended up coaching all sorts of people or things. Why leadership teams?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I think I love individual coaching. I've got a coach of my own. I believe strongly in it. But, having an individual coach is sort of like trying to fix a marriage by both couples having their own therapist, but never getting in a room for couples counseling. And my view of what was missing was high-performing teams being held accountable to step up and be high-performing teams. I saw way too much mediocrity. In fact, I participated in it. I was the chief marketing officer and head of sales at Starwood Hotels, and we ended up having to sell below industry multiples to Marriott, despite all of our innovations, despite everything that we were doing, which was extraordinary. Creation of the W, I ran the Star Preferred Guest program, the Heavenly Bed, all these amazing things that we did, and we ended up getting subsumed under the Borg of Marriott. And you look at another team that I was on. I was chief marketing officer of Deloitte. We were the lowest of the big eight back in the 90s. We aspired someday to be at par with Accenture and McKinsey, and they did it. And we did it because we were a band of brothers and sisters taking hills together. We wrestled ideas. We what I call co-elevated. We pushed each other higher. And at Starwood, we were evisceratingly competitive. We threw each other under the bus. There was a fear-based culture. And we were shit for in our culture, and we were notorious for it, and our results just showed. So when I left Starwood and went and did a startup had a little bit of money from the sale of that startup. I decided to start this research institute that juxtaposed what is a high performing team against the mediocrity that exists in most teams today.
Are you in the top 1%, top 5% if you're a high performing team, do you think?
Top 15%, top 15. Of the 3,000 teams in our data set, we only found 15% of the teams that are what we're calling level 4, level 5 teams on a scale of 0 to 5. And interestingly enough, so many of them are the disruptors born out of Stanford University, a group of founders. Once again, this belief of taking a hill together. No one has a CMO hat on, or a head of sales hat on, or a product hat on. They all have the enterprise hat on. They're not going to let each other fail. They know, and I'm going to throw out, one more consulting idea. It's like they know they have to cross the finish line together.
Yeah.
Right. All of these little taglines that represent what I want to see in a high performing team that I see very, very rarely. Usually I see silos, I see turf, I see back channel conversations, and ironically, they're normalized. Like, it seems perfectly acceptable to leave a meeting and start the real conversation. That's bullshit. And we placate each other by suggesting that it's polite. I don't know. I mean, it's, that's the first thing we do. We have a diagnostic in the book, and we give this diagnostic in the room, and we just get to see everybody gets to realize how mediocre we are. Now, is that acceptable or not?
I love the way you describe that. I think there's some work by McKinsey that actually the top 1% of drug development teams were 10x better than average. And they got their drugs to market 500 days quicker. Right. And so, have you got in that sort of 15% in your data set, have you got some of those examples where, the mediocre ones, where people are in the same industry? Have you got some more examples?
The beauty industry. The Estee Lauders, et cetera, out there, the juggernauts are being crushed by the e.l.f. Beauty company. The e.l.f. Beauty company was a mere startup, but they decided to engineer their entire being around being a high-performing team. When you're onboarding to that company, you're told that for the next 3 years, you will grow further and faster as a professional than anywhere else, but you're not allowed to have a thin, delicate skin. You need to constantly be giving each other feedback. And by the way, we do it out of love. We do it because we are committed to elevating each other. This principle of co-elevation. We have a shared mission, and we're committed to pushing each other higher. And that commitment comes to life at e.l.f. Beauty, and they're radically stealing market share from all of the big juggernauts. You talked about new product development. New product development's usually a year or two with the big guys, and over at e.l.f., it's a couple of months.
That purpose. So it hadn't occurred to me that an executive team would have a separate purpose to the company purpose until I was doing some work with Ruth Wagaman. And so when you say purpose, are you thinking company purpose? Are you thinking like this team has a...
No, it's a great point. So I have been blessed with knowing some people. So if you look at my book, 10 chapters, each chapter is anchored with a hero of some sort who does that particular shift. So I believe that there are 10 shifts we need to make to be a high-performing team. Every chapter has a hero story, and then we just give you really simple practices that you would just eat like popcorn and start to become a high-performing team through practice. And what I found as I looked at it was most of them were engineers who had taken their engineering mindset and decided to re-engineer how they worked. That's what really blew me away. We are lethargically sitting on ways of working that look the same for decades and decades, and our leaders are not curious about reinventing our ways of working for the modern era, for the volatility that we have, for the agility that we need, for the bold innovation and disruption that's required. There's a new way of working that is available to us, and we're lazy and we're sitting on old ways of working. And what's fun about the book and fun about my coaching is it's actually not that tough. Changing your culture, changing your ways of working is not that tough. Try a couple of practices and you'll be like, oh, wow, that was different. That wasn't conflict avoidant. we can actually bring a high degree of transformational behavior and outcomes at the snap of a finger by changing a few practices in how we collaborate. In a sense, I really am reinventing collaboration.
Okay.
I mean, I really think that's, I'm reinventing leadership to reinvent collaboration. That's what teamship is all about. The shifting from leadership, where you got it all on your shoulders as a leader. You're running around playing whack-a-mole, being mediocre, trying to get everything done. And the reality is we need to create a new social contract among the team that says, okay, good leader gives feedback, but a great team gives each other feedback. A good leader holds the team accountable, but a great team holds each other accountable. So what's the responsibility of the team? Let's not let them off the hook. Teams have to step up and starting to meet leaders in leadership.
I have a hypothesis about why we end up where we end up.
Yeah.
Which is that, when somebody starts a business, often there's 2 or 3 people who are better than everybody else, right? There's, the founder and there's a few. It's not a company of peers. It is, it's somebody and some doers. Okay. And therefore the problem solving keeps getting done by a few people. Mm-hmm. And you end up with a parent-child relationship. And then that's easy for everybody because, I don't have to. And it sort of then becomes self-perpetuating. Also, it's a bit like school. The teacher knows everything. I'm a student. I know nothing. So it's an easy transfer.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, that's a reasonable hypothesis, and particularly around founder-led companies. Yeah. Right now, I'm working to unbundle some pretty significant companies that were founder-led, but the founders moving on. And the mercurial operating system, the back channel, I mean, it's an effing mess. And, the need to create a much more deliberate operating system that's transparent, that's clean, that doesn't have all the back channel conversations, et cetera. It's a big deal. And some people won't make it through because their entire careers, they've been nurtured in this patriarchal environment that pits people against each other unwittingly or maybe wittingly, et cetera. So I don't disagree with. What I can say is that there are some things working against us historically. So I have 6 boys. And when
6 boys.
Yep. And when
my youngest, how many siblings do you have?
Me?
Yeah.
I have a brother and a sister from my mother's previous marriage, but I was basically an only child.
Right. Okay.
I was brought up pretty much as an only child. So yeah, this is a juxtaposition of my experience. That's for sure. But anyway, but my youngest boy, if I were to say to my boy, sit up straight, don't eat that way, that's feedback to a child that, by the way, was not input. It was not just advice. It was a directive. All of our lives, we've been getting feedback as directives. And what happens when we show up there, we got the directives from our bosses, the directives from our teachers, the directives from our coaches. So when we get feedback, we think we have to do something about it. So when we show up in a team and there's a group of peers who have opinions, when we give them to each other, we're giving to them as a directive, and we're receiving as a directive, and it's an incredibly defensive-laden situation. What I very quickly do among a team is I say, listen, none of your feedback has the right to be a directive. You're not directing your peers. The head of sales has feedback for the head of marketing. Let's give it, but you're giving data. And by the way, let's give it in the open so that your data can be triangulated with the chief product officer's data and other people's data. And we can all load the CMO, and having been a CMO, we get loaded with it's a good position to be loaded with lots of data because everyone's got an opinion about marketing. But damn it, none of us is allowed to believe that was a directive. It lightens it all up. I can now say, thanks so much, team. That was amazing input. Now I'm going to analyze that input and I'm going to come back and yes, I'm going to do this. No, I'm not going to do this for this reason. And I might do this, but we've got to have a social contract that says we're going to embrace radical transparency for the sake of having bolder ideas, not consensus, and not taking everyone's directive. So it's a big deal when I'm coaching a team to get them to land the idea that abundant feedback does not mean you have to take all of those opinions. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, totally. And that you don't have to have consensus, because
No way.
so often the CEO is trying to manage to consensus, or nobody wants to disagree.
Consensus is acceptable after a bold decision is made, meaning, okay, we've just gotten all the data and I'm going to take this decision, or I'm going to take this and this and put it together. And for the rest of you, thank you very much. This is what we're doing. Now we have to have consensus that that is what we're doing. It's really, disagree and commit, right? It's commit.
Yeah.
It's not consensus, but the ability to be bold first. And, of my 10 shifts from leadership to teamship, you've honed in on it originally when we were chatting before we went on air, which was candor is probably the most important to shareholder value. Getting real truth put on the table. It's rare. And I'll give you some simple practices. I mean, I do a thing called a candor break. It's one of the practices in chapter 3. A candor break is when we say to the team, all right, everybody go into breakout rooms at 2. I want you to write down what conversation needs to be had in this room that isn't being had. And if you would have said that in the room itself, you'd hear crickets, right? There's like open sphincter panic. If on the other hand, you go into breakout rooms and turn this into an assignment, now people are like, okay, that's interesting. What conversation should we be having that we're not having? People will actually take that thought thoughtfully and they'll write it down. And then when we come into the main room, they'll report it out. When you go into breakout rooms and ask a bold question, you increase psychological safety by 85%. Come back into the main room, you actually have a real conversation. That's called a candor break. Simple practice, but radically elevating the transparency of the team. And I've got there's 4 or 5 practices in the candor chapter. It's one of the most important ones that breed a higher degree of courage, trust, and psychological safety.
What do you think about one-to-ones versus coaching the team? So I'm the CEO, and the CEO constantly manages through a series of one-to-ones, which actually enforces the silos. So
I don't agree with it. I'm very strong on this, and people really disagree with me, and I love it. And it's, people say, well, you critique in private and you praise in public. And I'll tell you what you're missing. If Dominic wants to critique me in private, I'd be like, okay, I respect the fact that you didn't embarrass me. But what we didn't have is an option where Daniela over there would have said, Dominic, that's interesting you say that, because I don't experience that with Keith. The critiquing in public has the opportunity to triangulate truth. Now, there's a belief system of let's critique in private because it's shameful to critique. Again, bullshit. It's elevating to critique. I want a team to be able to critique ideas, performance, competencies, and style. That was one of the things in the chapter in the book here. I realized that we talk about feedback, but it's like Eskimos, they say, have multiple words for snow because it's important, Well,
we have a lot of words for rain in the UK.
Right, exactly. I actually don't know that that's true, that there are multiple words for snow, but I believe that there needs to be multiple words for feedback. We need to distinguish idea feedback, performance feedback, competency feedback. Keith, you need to learn a little bit more about how AI is going to impact the role of marketing, and style feedback. And we need to distinguish those and say all of those need to be a part of the algorithm. As I said, I'm really proud of this book. It's 24 years of research coaching high-performing teams. I sat in, and diagnosed 3,000 teams to identify these high-return practices of what winning looks like. And the book is so damn short. I mean, look at that. And compared to my other books, right? It's so short because, as Ben Franklin said, if I had more time, this book would be shorter. This is exactly the nuggets that I needed people to learn.
Do you want to take a canter through 10 and then we'll maybe the 10 things and then we'll dive into maybe 1 or 2 of them?
Yeah, sure. 100%. I mean, I'll tell you the most important ones. The shift from conflict avoidance to candor. And we've really touched on a number of those. The shift from peers feeling that they're responsible for their own resilience and their own energy versus the team having each other's back.
Yeah.
Let me stop on that just a little bit. when we hit the massive fatigue and frustration of the pandemic, we would show up in meetings and we would pause. And the first thing we said to everybody is everybody okay? Like, how's your mother? How are you feeling? Like there was a sense of commitment to taking care of each other. That is not true anymore. It's dissipated. We're now like bounding in. Nobody knows whether someone's mother is in assisted living. Nobody knows whether someone's spouse is struggling with a bad diagnosis or someone's kid's off the rails. No one knows. It's like this sense of an energy check, and not just that the leader cares, but the team cares. So if we can shift from individual resilience to team resilience, it's a very big deal in a volatile world where everybody's feeling overstressed and overstrained, right?
Yep.
So that's a very simple, and a practice is a simple monthly energy check. Everybody goes around and says, okay, what's bringing my energy down these days? And if you do that, then the team can say, I got it. Let me lighten your load on this. I didn't realize Thursdays are such a bad day for you for the following reason. I can pick up some slack. And, maybe I can help co-create some solution to this thing you have with that asshole that you've been dealing with, whatever it is. So that's a real powerful shift. Celebration is a shift. I mean, it's not one of the ones that I would put in the top 6, but I have to say teams that celebrate each other really lift each other's energy. Most teams are paltry in their celebration. And when it comes, it's only from the leader. If you could move to a team that actually is abundant in its celebration and it comes from everywhere, peer to peer, it's amazing how unbounded that team is of what's possible.
Let me interrupt the conversation just for a minute because I don't want you to miss this. My new book, Mind Your Fucking Business, is out on Amazon. If you're thinking yet another business book, I think you're wrong. This is actually a blueprint to cutting through the noise and achieving unparalleled success for you. It's based on 10 years of business coaching, spotting similar problems that people have had and coming up with real world solutions. If it's supercharging sales, if it's mastering talent acquisition, building a powerhouse brand, cultivating a company culture that breeds success, then this book is a ticket to your transformative journey. It's filled with practical tools and frameworks that I use every single day with my clients as part of their coaching program. If you want to take your business from good to great, look, you can go to Amazon and you can buy it, or you can click the link in the show notes and head over to monkhouseandcompany.com. I'll send it to you today. I'll send you a copy for free. I want to help you build a fantastic business. Now, back to the conversation. But I worked in a team years ago, and when I arrived, I experienced that, and I thought it was a gimmick.
Yeah.
And then I was the recipient of their generosity, and it was like I felt amazing.
Yeah.
And so it's just it's huge.
Let's analyze that. You felt it was a gimmick because it's so rare.
Yeah.
You were like, what is this? This is cheesy. This is this is like, I don't know, am I in America? What's the problem? It's like that sense really is. I get it why it would be a gimmick. And I also get why you walk into a team and somebody says, let's be candid with each other. I'm like, you serious? Like I call these social contracts. I define culture as a set of social contracts. Uh-huh. So for the candor one, there's an old social contract that says, I won't critique you in public. That would be throwing you under the bus.
Yeah.
That's a perfectly reasonable social contract. It exists in most companies.
Or because your mother said to you, if you've got nothing nice to say, don't say anything.
Right. There you go. Polite.
Yeah. So like stuff, right? Just it's at us all the time.
But polite, by the way, always turns into political. Because what your mother didn't say is if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it in public, and say it behind the back. Totally. Because that's what ends up happening. Because you're going to say it. The question is, where are you going to say it? But the other social contract is what Elf Beauty believes, which is, well, of course we're going to challenge each other openly because we're not going to let each other fail.
Yeah.
So that is a very different social contract. So each of these is a shift in the social contracts, and the same thing with celebration. It's like, that's cheesy. That's not real. We don't do that. And then all of a sudden you start doing it, you're like, wow, thank you. Somebody noticed.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody, by the way. I've met some of the most powerful people in the world. I don't know anybody who doesn't appreciate authentic gratitude and celebration. Anybody.
Some people don't attract it very often, but even they still appreciate it.
That's so true. Probably they don't attract it. Probably they don't attract it because they're fearful and insecure. They don't deserve it.
Yeah.
Agile is one. Moving from, Agile needs to be the real operating system of our organization.
Software development sprinting, you mean, take that to a business context.
Using the principles of Agile to develop software, but for everything.
Yeah.
So Arvind, the CEO of IBM, came in and said, okay, these are the 5 big rocks I need to change IBM. By the way, you look at their PE, they crushed it. Very old organization waking up and really making massive shifts in its interdependency, hardware, software, etc. But he started operating the system on agile sprints, monthly agile sprints. So if he has a big hill to take, which is the transformation of the sales organization, he's going to do it on monthly agile sprints. He also, which is another shift, redefined team away from org chart. Sales wasn't the job of sales. Sales was the job of whoever needed to be marshaled together as a team to create a shift in sales. And that's a big deal. That's a major shift in the book, which is redefining what a team is. A team isn't the org chart. That's one of the biggest challenges most companies have at the beginning, which is, who's your team? And you should be asking people, when they say, when you say to somebody, how's your team doing? Their answer should be which one?
Yeah.
Teams should be aligned around KPIs.
Dig into that a bit more. Have you got an example of that? Because normally the sales team would be aligned around sort of, revenue, contract acquisition, new customer, new logo acquisition.
But if we're looking at new customer acquisition, who's the team on that? Well, presumably marketing's a critical part of that team.
Yeah.
And presumably product is a critical part of that team, not just sales. And what happens if sales thinks they're the only ones and they stand in front of the room and everyone's judging them? And the reality is it needs to be a team effort of somebody on product, somebody on marketing, somebody in sales. That group is the team and they're the ones that have to own it. As soon as you start siloing functional or divisional ownership, you start getting finger pointing and you start getting a sense of us and them. I work with so many organizations where they have more vilifying ways to speak of their peers in different divisions than they do of the competition.
Well, I was just thinking, that group, that product marketing and sales, right? So often, you say to the sales team, what do you think of marketing? And they go, they have no impact on what we do. Or I look at product teams and the product team said, look, we built this amazing product. It's just the sales team are shit at selling it. Right. And it's like they built it with no customer input, right? Because they were just in their garden shed. They built it in the dark and then it's somebody else's problem to fix it.
This idea of inclusive collaboration. The reason we would build things in the dark was the perception of Jeff Bezos's 2 pizza rule. Never have a team bigger than can consume 2 pizzas for dinner. That was a belief system. And look, maybe when innovating new technologies, you want to put a bunch of engineers in a room and have them develop something that's a pilot. Maybe that's right. But in a sophisticated or complex organization, I want to get more inclusive inputs into the creation of new product that either comes from the customers themselves or through the sales organization, right? From marketing, from all of the different vantage points. Now, the reason we don't do is we think it'll take too long. Because if I get all those people in a room, it's going to be forever and we're going to come up with mushy consensus. There's 2 big assumptions. One, we shouldn't use meetings as the primary form of our collaboration. We need to start stepping up, and this is chapter 6 of the book, the shift from meeting-based collaboration to asynchronous collaboration.
Uh-huh.
If I have a problem, let's say we're falling behind retooling our manufacturing for a new product.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I want to send to the 12 people that I think have a dog in the hunt and say, what's the real problem we are having here? And what do you think is a bold solution? And they write into a spreadsheet. They have a week to be thoughtful and write into a spreadsheet What's the problem? What's a bold solution? And everybody sees everybody's answer. Maybe people even get to send it out to others. We could have 30 people opining in this document. What's the problem? What's the solution? And what tends to happen is truth emerges. And what I see too often when I'm coaching teams is truth will often emerge and brilliant answers will emerge from people who were either not invited into the meeting in the first place, if there was a meeting, or people who just are more introverted than were to consume the room. So now we have thoughtful thinking, massively inclusive, and we could have one meeting that we've never had a meeting yet. This is all asynchronous. We could have one meeting. We could land the plane on the solution with 3 people. We don't even need 30. We don't need 12. We might have 3 people see and land the plane on something bold using asynchronous collaboration. What would have happened otherwise? Start a meeting of 12 people. 4 people's voice are heard. That's actually our research shows. Then there's the meeting after the meeting in the hallway. There's the private DMing. Then the realization we need another meeting. Bullshit. I mean, by now, and it's just it's all mercurial, meandering bullshit. We could have done all of this fast in asynchronous collaboration and landed the plane.
Well, and also you then have to sell the solution to the people. And the other thing about the spreadsheet occurs to me is that they've been involved in the process. Yeah. They've seen the answers.
Well, my favorite phrase is buy-in is bullshit, because who wants to be sold to?
Nobody.
It's like this small room that created it now has to go get buy-in. And we all know it's Pyrrhic, and they don't really want to know our belief because they've already come up with their answer. But my input, if it was up front, could have actually changed their points of view and would. I mean, I don't believe that it should be Pyrrhic. I think that bolder, more inclusive inputs actually get better answers. And we don't adhere to that because we have this tape that plays how we collaborate is in meetings. And if we get a bunch of people in a meeting, it's for shite. And so I put that on for you, by the way. Did you know that? American who did that. And so, the idea of reinventing collaboration is massive. That's chapter 6.
I just want to go back to conflict again because
I love conflict. Let's go there.
Right. I think I spend most of my time, and I think it's where I have most of the impact on getting people to have constructive conflict. What proportion of people can't do it? So when you when you're coaching a team, there's some people in the room who go, oh, okay, get the concept. Happy to do that. Can lean in. You've given me permission to play. What proportion of people just go, I'm not playing. I'm going to leave.
Well, again, so I have this practice I call stress testing. It's so simple if you apply a new practice to get a much greater percentage of candor. I mean, I don't know. The actual answer to your question is less than 10%.
Okay. That's way small. I thought that would be way more than that.
Yeah. No, not at all, because we have to change the practice. So in the olden days, you would have the marketing organization showing up, presenting a new marketing campaign, and they do a report out. Here's all the research. And by the way, what are they doing? They're selling to you. Here's the research we did. Here's our conclusions. Here's what we're going to go do. And I don't allow report outs in that format. I shift report outs to stress tests. A stress test is intended to say there is wisdom in the crowd and we're going to force the crowd into giving critique, and it's mandatory as a part of what we're trying to do here. So it starts with the individual giving a report out that says, here's what we know and believe, here's where we're struggling, and here's where we think we're going. Just by virtue of the report out sharing already what they're struggling with, opens the room to be willing to be a little bit more critical. But then everybody goes into breakout rooms. Even that 10% that's struggling with being candid goes into breakout rooms, and they come back with having written down the answers to the following 3 questions. Here's where I want to challenge you. You're not seeing this. Here's an innovation or an idea that you might be missing. And here is somewhere I'd be willing to help. Now, that exercise has just turned the challenge that you want them to give in the room organically, which maybe 50% would not, maybe 80% would not. Now you've turned it into an assignment when you turn it into an assignment, people acquiesce. And sure, there might be 10% who are such an aversion, or they're so damn political that they want to hold their ideas for back channel conversations to get their way. But that's very rare. Most people, when given this format of a stress test, will step up to the plate in a big way.
Yes, I like that. I call that making it programmatic. If you tell people that this is the process, they just follow the process. You know, I often it's the same when I'm working with people around putting up their prices. You know, that people sweat about putting up their prices. It's terrible. But if you could just say, look, this is the process you're going to go through, tell the team that they're going to do it. Just all of these difficult things become easier when people just believe it's a process.
Exactly.
This is what we've got to do. Of the 10 things, what's the hardest change to make?
I think it's actually that idea of redefining team itself, because it requires us to think outside of our norm of an org chart. And I do believe that people have to be very practical and purposeful. There's a practice I call the relationship action plan, getting people to say, every one of my OKRs, every KPI has a team around it. I got to write down the team. I got to define the team. We have to meet as a team. We have to have a social contract as a team. That's a big deal. That really is. So this idea of working across silos, it's a very, very big deal.
Yeah, well, and it also challenges people's egos, because often their egos attached to where they sit in the org chart. They're going to have to give 100%. That up. Let me change tack then. And look, fantastic book. People should definitely never lead alone. Marvelous. What else should people pick up?
Well, gosh, I mean, go read The Great Gatsby. It's an amazing book. But no, if I were, I see the geek way behind you, and Andrew did a really beautiful job of defining an entrepreneurial organization, what that looks like. I also feel that Peter Diamandis's book, Abundance, Future is Faster Than You Think. Peter's work is extraordinary because he was the one that personally inspired me to start getting out ahead of AI. You know, he was the one that told me 8 years ago that if your business isn't driven and defined by AI, you won't be in business. And he's right. And it took too long for most of us to realize that. So I would pick a futurist like Peter, and then I would get wonky, about how to be a great engineering mindset in the work itself.
Have you got anything around Agile for people who aren't software developers?
So look, I did a lot of research on Agile. My last book, Competing in the New World of Work, did a very thorough analysis of all the books on Agile. Most books on Agile actually go way too wonky and way too deep, right? Bain did a really good book on it, but you don't need all of that.
Yeah.
I did a lot of research into the subject, and I put it in Competing in the New World of Work, but I also then even summarized it even more. And we have an entire Agile chapter in the new book that I think is all you need. It's just how the Agile principles integrate into your leadership cadence.
Fab. And what's the story with the silver shoe behind
Oh, yeah. Well, a couple of times I wanted to mention it. So I had a very dear friend who passed away during the pandemic. His name is Tony Hsieh.
Oh, yeah, and Zappos.
He led Zappos Shoes, and he was one of the great innovators, one of the radical innovators in human capital. He died so tragically, and I gathered a group of his friends, and we went together, and we created the Tony Hsieh Award. And now we have thousands of applicants every year, thetonyshiehaward.com, who come in, and these individuals are proud of something that they're doing like Tony did to radically innovate in the human capital arena. And then we make an award every year for 1 to 5 of them that just inspire us and whose practices we should follow. So you want to take a look at it, go to thetonyshiehaward.com or apply. I'm really all about leaping ahead 10 years and being inspired by those who are already doing it. Yeah. And it's a shoe. It's actually the shoe he wore turned into a bronze.
Oh, fab. That's magic. What are some of the things that you've awarded it for? What are some of the stories?
I'll tell you the most exciting thing that I'm starting to see that I do believe with AI is going to make it possible is leaderless teams. The trend is called holacracy. There's really a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you have command, control, hierarchical, autocratic kind of teams, right? Very traditional, very old school. We know that doesn't work. And then as you move along the spectrum, you get to the stuff I'm talking about, which is asking the team to level up 30%, take more responsibility, be more empowered, share in the leadership. But on the way end of the extreme, you have this thing called holacracy, self-managed teams. It's where the team negotiates a social contract that says, this is how we'll collaborate. This is how we'll work. This is how we'll figure out if we have disagreements. This is how we'll compensate and reward each other. There are companies out there that are really leading with holacratic teams. It was interesting. Tony Hsieh experimented it with holacracy. It was one of the reasons Amazon bought them. Amazon was thinking, what if we could have an unbounded growth without having to worry about having great frontline managers? So there's a lot of experimentation. I do think in the world of AI, when AI is your coach, AI is saying, you talk too much in that meeting. I saw that back channel conversation because I saw your DMs. If AI is your coach, I do think we're going to getting more and more holacratic in our teams.
That's fab. I mean, certainly I've looked at some of the stuff around Bertshog, the nursing company in Holland, where they do that. It's just one of these things where the CEO has to be passionate about it.
100%. And Tony was.
And it's like, otherwise it doesn't happen because it's too hard.
100%.
It's just, maybe it's not too hard. It's just different. So fab. Keith, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thanks very much indeed for sharing your thoughts.
Tons of fun. I love the banter. Your smile is contagious, dude. It's fantastic. I'm all for coming back. Have me back sometime.
Oh, mate, that'd be brilliant. Be great. Thanks very much for coming on.
Cheers.